Hi everyone, and welcome to the 5th edition of CS Lab. My name is Stefan Segreto Aguilar, and I'm the coordinator of Circostrada Network, as well as the head of international development of Artsena. I am very happy and excited to open this webinar and share with you our very first digital experience. After Balma, near Toulouse in France, Fossano, near Torino in Italy, Aix-en-Provence, near Marseille in France, Riga and Chessis in Latvia, we were supposed to go to Manchester last April, but a pandemic, and I'm talking about the coronavirus pandemic, not the racism pandemic we're all living in, forced us to readjust our initial plans. Together with XTRAX, who's a member of Circostrada Network and the co-organizer of this event, we decided to postpone the CS Lab, to reframe it, and to adapt it to the current situation, hence the following red thread of leadership in times of crisis. I also want to take this opportunity and express my deep gratitude to both Hilary and Vicki for being so understanding and receptive. In the process of adapting, we decided we would try to achieve the same objectives: to encourage self-critical assessment, to propose a forward-thinking approach, as well as tools, techniques, and strategies to become change makers, to reconnect with our own creativity, to build an inspiring vision for the future, to question what is stopping us from being a fully representative sector, and how we can ensure that everybody is included, and to advocate effectively for our work and build support. Before I give the microphone to Anaïs from XTRAX, I just want to take a few more seconds to either refresh your memory or get you up to speed on what Circostrada Network is. Circostrada is the European network for circus arts and street arts. It was created in 2003, and it is supported by the Creative Europe program of the European Commission and the French Ministry of Culture. It is coordinated by Artsena, the French National Center for Circus Arts, Street Arts, and Theater, and it is made out of more than 120 members across 35 countries in Europe and beyond. The main goals of the network are to build a sustainable future for circus arts and street arts, to capacitate professionals, to create new connections internationally, and to spur innovative ideas and projects within these two communities. If you're interested in knowing more about who we are and what we do, please don't hesitate to check out our website, follow us on social media, to register to our newsletter, or simply write us or call us, since we will not be able to hang out after this. I wish you all a fantastic and inspiring session, and I give the floor to Anaïs from XTRAX. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us in this online CS Lab on leadership in times of crisis. My name is Anaïs Bio, and I am the Creative Development and Partnerships Manager at XTRAX. To give you some context, XTRAX is a Manchester-based development organization for outdoor arts, and our work covers three main areas. So firstly, we are the founding members and managers of the widest outdoor arts consortium in the UK, called Without Walls, and we work in partnership with 36 partners and festivals across the country to support raising the profile of the UK outdoor art sector and supporting the development of new outdoor work. Our second focus is on international relations, and we do this through Platform for UK. This is a strategic project and designed to support the international promotion and export of UK outdoor artists. And finally, we offer consultancy services in festival and event programming, as well as delivering a range of training opportunities for artists and festivals. We are also the producers of the large-scale show As the World Tipped by Wired Aerial Theatre. So I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the crucial support that we receive from Arts Council England, without whom much of this activity wouldn't be possible. So coming back to the CS Lab, this was developed in collaboration between XTRAX and Circostrada as a way of addressing some of the critical topics which we hope will allow our sector to develop a more positive and meaningful way, promoting equality and also ensuring that we have a strong place in the wider cultural ecology. So the CS Lab consists of 3 main keynote sessions that are open to all, followed by practical sessions aimed at Circostrada members. We are very pleased to say that we have more than 200 people from across 20 countries joining us online. And before introducing to our brilliant speakers, I would like to run through a few practicalities to ensure that you make the most of this session. So firstly, this session will run for an hour. Please feel free to use the chat to say hello, who you are, and where you're from. You could add the country in there. For access purposes, and also acknowledging that English is not the first language for a lot of our listeners today, we have enabled captioning during all of the keynotes. So to activate the captions, you can just click on the button Captions, which should be just next to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you would like to ask questions to the panelists, you're very welcome to use the Q&A button. You can use a chat to speak amongst other participants, but for all questions, we ask that you use the Q&A button. We are recording all of these keynote sessions, and these will be made available following the lab. Feel free to comment and post and tweet using the hashtag CSLab5, and make sure that you follow Circostrada and XTRAX on social media, as we'll be sharing some resources and publications following the event. So without further ado, and before I disappear, I'd like to introduce the topic for today's keynote session, which is leadership in times of crisis and how can we best manage our teams and organizations in these challenging times. So to address this topic, we are joined by Hilary Carty, Director of the Clore Leadership Program, and Vicki Amedume, Artistic Director and founder of the contemporary circus company Upswing, who will be moderating the session. So a warm welcome to you both, and thank you so much for taking part in the CS Lab. We're absolutely delighted to have you both. I will now hand over to Vicki to kickstart the keynote session, and I hope that you all find this session very fruitful. Thank you.
Thank you, Anais and Stefan. So welcome everybody. I am Vicki Amedume and I will be moderating the session. And I have the extreme pleasure of welcoming Hilary Carty to give this morning's keynote. So Hilary Carty is the director of the Clore Leadership Program, which is a program aimed at developing and strengthening the leadership potential across the cultural and creative sectors. Hilary took that role in autumn 2017, and this was after 6 years of work as a consultant, a facilitator and a coach, specializing in leadership development, management and change organization. And before that, Hilary was the director of the Cultural Leadership Program and has previously had positions with the Arts Council, the UK's major funding body, as a director and as a senior policymaker. So Hilary, I'm really pleased that you're here today. And I'm going to hand over to you because I think you prepared some thoughts that you want to share with us.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you. It's brilliant to be speaking to such an international group, and brilliant to be speaking to a group which is responsible for creating so many of the fantastic experiences that we have as culture across the world. It's great to be joining this conversation. I thought I'd speak for about 10 minutes or so just to put some ideas into the mix, and then we can make it more interactive and responding to any questions or thoughts that you might have. Firstly, may I say thank you to Circostrada and to XTRAX for inviting me to come and join in this event. It's an event that encourages us to explore issues, to exchange opinions, and such spaces are really valuable for gathering information, for gathering perspectives, testing what we think and what we know, and using that to develop strategies. And all of those things are really essential when we're looking at leading in a time of crisis. So our current crisis is COVID-19, and it is all-consuming. We did not ask for it, but we can learn from it. And learning, for me, is one of the most essential leadership skills. To be able to reflect, to extract the learnings, and then to put them into practice. So by learning from what is good as well as what is bad, we can build our resilience. And that too is essential to have in our kit bag of leadership practice. So as I'm experiencing it, I see COVID-19 having 3 distinct phases: the lockdown phase, the learn phase, and the lead phase. So lockdown was not just our governments telling us to stay in our homes. For us, lockdown was a lockdown of culture and cultural expression. We locked down our businesses, our assets, and our resources to protect our organizations as much as possible for the future. For the many independent and freelance workers in our sector, lockdown meant cancellations. Contracts that had been months in the making fell apart in days. Opportunities that were previously open-ended shut in an instant. We have seen our livelihoods and the things that nourish us squashed onto screens and reduced to fit inside 2 dimensions. But our art is multi-dimensional and multi-sensational. So we have been challenged to our core, and that has not been easy. We moved from lockdown into the learning phase, where we have learnt, and we are still learning because I think that phase is still ongoing, that actually we can act differently. We can learn new ways. All those times we struggled with dates for meetings that we could get together for planning or for project managing. Now everything is taking place online, and we are learning at speed that actually we can do things differently. We are learning to do things digitally, and I, for one, hope that some of those practices that we have had to adopt, we will retain. Something about the expediency of the moment really demanded that we became inventive and imaginative in our response. Well, invention and imagination that's our raw material. That is what we use as cultural activists. So even despite the challenge, I think it has been useful to learn that we can innovate and we can create at pace. So we've learned to create new joys from our living rooms, from our kitchens. We have sung and danced. We've created brilliant and really funny new art. It's not a substitute for the live experience that brings most of us real joy. It does not hold the same options for collaboration and connection with other creative people. And it does not give us that rewarding moment of applause that confirms the success. But culture has not stood still. And some of those adaptations made out of crisis can genuinely stimulate and entertain us in the new time ahead. So the 3rd phase of COVID, and one which we are transitioning to right now, I think has perhaps some of the most treacherous pitfalls, because now we have to make those medium and long-term decisions. We're no longer simply responding and reacting in a crisis. The challenge shifts to leading our sector, our organizations, and ourselves out of this crisis and into what I term a new normal. And that's actually quite scary, because the decisions we make now will stay with us for the time ahead. Each individual organization and sector will need to juggle their own list of priorities and determine what factors are most critical for their sector and situation. So I'm not attempting to offer a guidebook or a rule, rather to share some of the issues that I know are rising to the top for cultural leaders at this time. I'm going to lay out 3 themes that I think it's important that we should consider. The first theme is about leading with purpose. As we move gradually out of this period of severity, we must learn how to weave creativity and cultural engagement within a new contract with our audiences and communities. COVID has changed our audience's expectations and their experiences of culture. So some now know what they have missed, and others will not see a rationale for culture when life is so hard and their resources are so reduced. So as cultural providers, we need to face up to that truly tough question. Are we still needed? What is our mission or our purpose now? And how, after the experience of COVID-19, can that mission or purpose best be achieved? These are fundamental questions, taking us right to the core of why we exist as cultural providers, organizations, and individuals. But the road ahead will be truly hard. We cannot expect that the rich and nuanced blends of creativity and entertainment that we were part of just 3 months ago will return immediately. The economics tell us that things need to be different. We will not just resume from where we left off. So a hard review of our mission or purpose is really important so that we can prepare for the challenging road to recovery. My second theme is diversity and inclusion. And let me say straight away, Black Lives Matter. As leaders, we have to live through our values as individuals and as organizations. So I'm going to head up my issue on inclusion with that statement. Of course, all lives matter. That is also true, but one does not negate the other. So let us not be afraid to be clear about the essential challenges facing discrete groups of people at this time. And let us not become confused or reticent because we don't want to get things wrong or to cause offense. Rather than saying nothing, I think our role as leaders is to learn, to educate ourselves so that we can be thoughtful, considerate, but also clear. So for me, inclusion matters. It's a leadership issue, one where we need to act urgently and differently to get a different result. Few of us are satisfied with the many inequalities that were structured into our cultural infrastructure before the pandemic. So why rebuild something that we did not like? Which is why you might also support #WeShallNotBeRemoved, led by disabled leaders and acting to prevent deaf, neurodiverse, and disabled leaders from being ignored as we rebuild post-COVID. There are many campaigns and they need our support. I think the challenge we have with diversity and inclusion comes down to power. Very few of us want to give up the reins of power we have had to work so hard to secure. For everyone knows the jobs we do are not easy, not well paid, and it's tough to get to a position of management or leadership. So we hold tight to what we have. We recruit in our own image, and we step back from promoting accessible points of entry or opening wide the routes to career progression. I'm really not trying to be controversial here. That's just what my experience shows me. Coming out of this crisis, we have an opportunity to build based on values rather than simply rebuilding what we had before. So the challenge is to seize this moment and not be satisfied with good intentions, leaving the precious outcomes to fickle chance. We can act now to actively promote diversity and inclusion in recruitment, in progression, in management, through leadership. We can, whilst we are in lockdown, take the time to create momentum for a positive change for the future. My third theme asks us to get comfortable with uncertainty. No one really knows what lies ahead. We don't know the rules of engagement, the timings, the constraints, and yet we do need to plan and to prepare for a future that has a place for us. We will have to find our own right ways through. And that will be different for each of us, whether as individuals or organizations. As leaders, we will need to become more comfortable with questions that have no simple answers, to conjure with complexity and skillfully navigate dense data, using them all as tools to support our decision-making in the new era. Wayfinding in this time of uncertainty and ambiguity is fraught with danger. But I suggest 3 watchwords that might help us through. Optimism, to be able to look ahead and see what might just be possible. Even the smallest lamp can illuminate a path. So use any chink of light to start building options and imagining the future. My second watchword is courage, to act despite not having all the facts and figures clearly laid out and transparent. And my third is collaboration. We are each part of a bigger picture, and partnerships and co-working are going to be prized more than ever as we go forward. So I'm sharing those 3 themes as some priorities for leading in a time of crisis. Leading with purpose, prioritizing diversity and inclusion, and getting comfortable with uncertainty. So they are not the only themes on my mind, but I thought I'd offer those to just get us started, and then we can explore others through your questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilary. That was fantastic, and a really good provocation for us to consider. I was really particularly struck by your last point, because it's a point of conversation that's surfaced a lot in the preparation for this session, and in the conversations I've had with friends and colleagues outside. You know, that idea of the challenge of dealing with uncertainty. And day to day, it feels like our reality is shifting and that we need to adapt fluidly. I wondered if you had any thoughts, any further thoughts or words of advice to offer about how we manage ourselves and our teams through these uncertain times.
I think that's really important, and managing ourselves is really critical. I'm always thoughtful of that statement on the when you get on an airplane and they say fix your safety belt first before you fix others, because actually we have as leaders to take care of ourselves to be strong enough to be able to take care of others. So the issue of looking after ourselves is completely important. And, you know, when you think about the time that we're in, it's really important that we mix well our professional lives, our personal lives, our mental health, our physical health, and make sure that we are taking time to put all of those things in place and to give them all some time. It's really hard. I remember the first 4 or 5 weeks of this crisis, just being head down, trying to think what on earth, when, how, why, what, who, to just try and grab something to say, how on earth do we get through this? Can we get through this? Will we? Who do I? What? So it really was head down. And you know, you can sometimes just get caught up in that. But I think it's important that even when we're grappling with such, and COVID is one of the biggest challenges we've all had to deal with collectively, really important even within then to just take a moment when you can to step back so that you can see further forward. And seeing further forward allows you to take in more people. It allows you to take in wider opinions. And that in itself allows you to have a better interaction with the people that you're working with. But looking after your teams means asking, how are they doing? What's happening? And just giving airtime for the issues that are just on the side of the agenda and not just the agenda itself. I think it speaks to some of the new ways of working that we will need to adapt as we're going forward.
Yeah, Yeah, that space of kind of having, I recognise with my team that we're having deeper and more involved conversations now than ever before, and I thought we were a quite well-connected team. But that care that we're showing for each other, I think, is so important and so valuable. You talked a little bit about the different roles that that exist in this sector. You know, circus and street arts is a landscape that's made of many diverse parts. We have a large portion of independent and freelance artists and small companies, as well as some big organisations and government bodies that kind of all operate together in an ecology, and all have very different business models and working practices. What do you think cultural leadership means in that kind of really complicated space?
I think cultural leadership is eclectic and it is diverse. I don't see it as a uniform entity. We all lead in different ways, and it's really important to recognize that. I think it's important for us not to look at leadership as being about status, or always about hierarchy. I consider leadership to be about behaviors. So in a sector that is so diverse, it's important for us to understand how we are leading as individuals and how we connect in with the infrastructure and the organizations, and to try not to obey one power balance or one power dynamic in that, so that it is always one way. That's when we can use our leadership more effectively, when we can understand, actually, this is my moment of influence, and I am influencing an organization, or as an organization, I am influencing, making possible what can happen for individuals. So that interrelationship, that dialogue between organizations and individuals, which this sector encompasses because the power actually lies everywhere, that's something that I think we need to really understand and get comfortable with using the dynamics, so that we appreciate more when actually it's the creative within us who should be taking the lead, and when it is the executive that should be taking the back seat and simply listening, absorbing and following. We have to be more flexible with when we are leading and when we are following, and to understand that we can do both of those things. That notion for me of leadership starting from where you are is really important, and it's empowering, and we have to use it much more flexibly. We have to hold our leadership more lightly so that we can bring more people into the leadership space. And if we don't do that, they will come in anyway. You know, we're at a time when individuals and groups are beginning to understand more that they need to take a stand, they need to enter a space, and you can't always do that with permission. And so sometimes, you know, if you're not loose enough or open enough, you'll find that, you know, someone will just kick that door down. So the door's going to be open anyway. Far easier if you're sensible and just open it up.
Leave it open. So leading from where you are is something that really resonates with me. I was lucky enough to do the Clore Fellowship a few years ago, and that's a statement that appears regularly in the discourse around Clore. You're the director of the Clore Leadership Programme now. Can you tell me how you're responding to this current situation?
Okay, so I think at Clore Leadership, as with everybody in the beginning, we were just responding with shock, really, and trying to understand what this meant for ourselves as an organization, but also our alumni and the wider sector. So the first thing we had to do was to sort out what was the immediate and medium and, you know, long term, we're talking months in kind of COVID time, as it were. Everything is truncated. But what could we do straight away? What could we do in the medium term? And what were we looking to build, you know, a few months ahead? We had our fellowship program was absolutely up and running. So we had our fellows, different parts of the world, completely in the middle of their programs. We had to grip that, and my team, I have to say, have been fantastic. I really want to pay tribute to how the Clore leadership team have responded during this crisis in a really inventive and creative way. So we had to pull all of those programs together, develop new mechanisms for making those possible. We started to create access avenues for our alumni, and that was a great two-way exercise, because not only were we able to share, but we were also able to listen and to pick up on the discourse and the issues that were being faced. I remember one of our board meeting in early, one of our board members said, you know, the thing that's on my mind is furloughing, and I'm having to grapple with it. Why don't you do a webinar about that? Because everyone is talking about this issue of furloughing, and we, you know, it's in the UK, and who understands what this really is? And so we pulled that together in 3.5 days, and we went live with it, and it was brilliant. And that was a real moment for us to say, this is what we should be doing. Rather than planning 6 months ahead, we can do that as well, but let's do the things that we think people are needing now. Let's do those. So we've had a couple of, we've had 4 webinars. One was on building resilience, learning from colleagues in different parts of the world who have had to deal with crisis and challenge over and over again. What can we learn from those experiences? We did one just last week on digital culture. What will it mean going forward? Yes, we've put everything online, but what are our options for sustainability in all of that? And we also did one which asked, what's the role of the board in maintaining that future-facing objective whilst we're all in the midst of crisis? So those sorts of issues that we were picking up, that people were grappling with. We've also put some very short videos online called Leading from a Distance, where we've asked people who we usually work with on our courses and programs to just download their thoughts, just share, you know, what you're thinking, what your responses are. So we've really tried to act in the moment. And underneath it all, we're now planning for the long term. So we're planning about when can we come back, when will our programs come back. And I think, as with many organizations, our challenge is to take some of that really wonderful, momentous kind of spontaneous rather planning and delivery, and capture that as how we go forward. I don't think we can just resume our previous programming, as fantastic as it was and as valuable as it was. We need to mix it. And that's what I think I see as, you know, when I talked about looking at our purpose for us as a sector as a whole, we need to have a look at what are the ways that we should be delivering our purpose going forward, rather than just returning to what we did before. So I've been really excited and cheered by the response to some of the innovations that we have introduced quite recently. And I see that keeping some of those is going to be really valuable for us in helping us to just flex our leadership muscles and maintaining that issue of being relevant going forward.
Yeah, it's really interesting how this kind of crisis, this destabilization and our inability to continue business as usual has actually created a space for experimentation. And I've seen the different videos that have been coming up on the Clore website, and I love the mix of practical but also those inspirational moments as well, with some kind of quite radical hope. It's been a real pleasure. Just to let everybody who's watching know that we will be opening up to questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A feature, and we will come round to them as we converse. just really briefly reflecting back on what you were talking about with values-based leadership. What kind of processes and advice can you offer people about how to really embed that within their organization?
I think values is a complex one to embed within organizations, and it requires authenticity. I think that many organizations now do a values-based exercise at quite a superficial level, and then promote it. It's, you know, these are our 3, these are our 5, etc., and we're all good. But I think to really embed it within your organization, it actually takes quite a long time, and it evolves. And so I think it's really important that we work slowly to develop our values and to really understand what our values are for us as individuals and for us as an organization. And sometimes they're not the same thing. An organization will have a purpose and the values need to be linked to that purpose. And sometimes as an individual, our values are not chiming with those of the organization, and that becomes really quite a tense moment. But we have to work through those in order to really say we are embedding our values into the work that we do. It's really important work. It's slow work if we're going to do it genuinely, and it's work that has to be repeated and revisited, and you have to question. You have to use your values to explore and determine the responses to things. And it's only by doing that that you really get to see not just the headlines of values, the 3, 5, 7, but how they are delivered within the organization. That's why I say it's a slow process to really work through that. But I think you start by conversations about what's important to us. You start by conversations about how can we truly manifest what we say our values are. You dig up the examples when things reflect well your values and when things don't, and you work through those. You have to create a space of permission where people don't have to get it right the whole time. That's really important. And a place where people can question and don't have to be right or perfect the whole time. Because it's, as I say, it evolves and it moves and language moves. So we have to allow ourselves the space to be real and work through to arrive at that sort of shared consensus. That's why I say it's slow work. It takes time if you're going to do it well.
That really resonates with a question that's just come up in our Q&A section about transparency, how important it is to be transparent when leading our teams, especially in times of uncertainty, when you are uncertain yourself.
I think transparency, again, is complex. Well, I use that word a lot because for me, very few things are just black and white. I deal in grey a heck of a lot. So everyone talks about transparency as if it's an easy thing to do. And for me, transparency is an aspiration. And I will try to always be transparent. But I have also to juggle that with care.
Yeah.
So sometimes if you try to juggle transparency and care, you end up in that gray spot. How much do I share? So sometimes in my position, I will be seriously anxious about some issues that I can see ahead. And I have to hold really carefully how much of that I am transparent about with those that I'm working with or our stakeholders or audiences, what have you. So I think transparency is something that we should always have, you know, above our head so that it's there. We're always dealing with it. And we're always trying to conjure with what is the level of transparency that I can absolutely, genuinely be at this moment in time. But I think that we also have to juggle that with care and integrity. And that's the values work really kind of coming to the fore. Transparency for me is something that we always have to have as a watchword. And then we have to juggle. And I think if you work through with integrity, that juggling is not easy, but you will find a way through. The thing is not to hold back, not to be secretive or, you know, kind of act in corners. That doesn't help anyone in a time of crisis, but I wouldn't pretend that it's easy either.
Yeah, thank you. We have another question in the Q&A from Liz Pugh. I'm going to read it. Safety has often been seen as a trump card over aesthetic and other considerations. This will surely get worse now, not easier. What tactics might we employ on a daily basis to bring together the need for empathy and care for our team and audiences with the need to blaze a trail and not be risk adverse ourselves, and demonstrating the courage that you mentioned?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You know, people use health and safety as a barrier when it should be an enabler. And what health and safety is trying to get us to do is to really take care, really pay attention, and really make sure that not that we don't understand the risks, but that we understand the risks really well and we respond to the risks. So what I would say is, make yourself the expert on health and safety. Make yourself the expert. Because if you do that, then when someone says, oh, you can't do this because, or that's too dangerous, you can counter that by saying, actually, no, this is the risk, and here's how we are going to respond to the risk. And once you do that 2 or 3 times, then you develop a sense of authority, and people allow you to take more risks because they get to understand you're not just going to, you know, pop up and do X or Y, etc., but you do take that into consideration. I think it's going to be dangerous for us in the long term if we lose our courage and if we lose our ability to take risks, because that is what we do as creative, cultural individuals. But that doesn't mean that we should be stupid. It actually means that we should be really intelligent. If you are going to innovate for audiences, for your team, for people, for your stakeholders, you really need to know what you're doing. And so for me, risk-taking requires you to develop a level of expertise, to look in the round, to take cognizance of what the issues are, and to really understand how you're going to mitigate that risk. Then you can act with courage.
Yeah, thank you. There is another question. Often in the cultural sector, we find an old leadership linked with organised lobbies, economic interests and sectorial interests, and which from their resilience are difficult to replace or displace. Could you give us some clues on how to deal with these situations in a positive and constructive sense?
Oh, yeah, right. Give me the hard question, how to deal with the existing hierarchy. Thank you. It's challenging. It's really challenging. I think, you know, if we look at it in terms of not just interests, sectoral interests, but institutions and entities that have been there for a long while, and they almost have that seat at the table, and it's expected that they have that seat at the table, and you can be sort of in the kitchen, you know, way back looking, saying, how do I get in, how do I get in? I think first I just want to admit that this is a really difficult task. And because it is a difficult task, I don't want to underestimate the level of persistence and perseverance that is really necessary if you are going to make change. If change was easy, we would have done that a long time ago, because now is not the first time that we are hearing activist campaigns talking about change from different levels. And it's really interesting for me that if you sit on the inside of some of those sectoral interests, it's not necessarily that you want to protect your interests, but it's that you think, actually, we're doing a good job and we're making a difference. Very few people, no matter where you are in the spectrum, think, oh, right, what I want to do today is to be average and mediocre. So everybody thinks that they are working well and they find a rationale for their organization to exist. So one of the things that we need to do is to raise those questions. We need to raise the debates, and we need to keep raising the debates. We need to infiltrate some of those interest groups that don't necessarily want us in there, and we need to step forward and say, hey guys, consider this. But I think the key is that it's not easy, it takes a long time, and we have to be persistent. One of the things that we need to do is to build allyship. And that really means looking at who else thinks in the same way that we do. How can we join forces? So for me, that issue of collaboration as a way of working is really critical. Because if we can connect with others who also see these issues as problematic or as holding us back, we can then find ways to join up and be a little bit louder and to be stronger and to link arms and move together. And that for me is how you make change over the long term. You find your allies, you keep pushing forward, and you don't really, you have to expect that some of the doors won't open, but you just have to keep going.
So persistent and a multi-fronted attack.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Yep. I think, Vicki, there was also a question that I saw right at the beginning about the level of pain that we're carrying. Yes. And I don't, it's gone up the thread, but I remember I saw it quickly, and I don't want to ignore that, because it is really traumatic right now for many people. The issue that is in front of our face because of the incident with George Floyd, rest in peace, is one about race. And in talking about that, no one is saying that it is the only issue or trying to create a hierarchy of diversity needs. But it is the one that is really on top of our agenda and reminding us about the difficulty of being creative within this moment in time. And I think it's very important that we own up to that. I think it's important that we look at how we are talking to individuals from different groups. How are we asking them to be at this moment in time? How are our questions going to land for them as opposed to for us? So we have a sense of need, we want to understand, but is this really the time to ask someone, to burden them with your issue or your concern? Is this the right moment? Can you allow them to breathe and to be? Can you allow discrete groups of interest to gather quite selectively to discuss this issue and response and not feel threatened, not feel vulnerable because you're not in there, but to just understand that a discrete group might want to just meet together to cry, to shout, to scream, to celebrate, to do all of the things in order to regroup, take self-care, and find a way through. And I think that that issue of pain, if we don't acknowledge it and find an outlet for it, it's gonna go internal, which means it's hidden and it will make us ill. And so I really want, you know, my response is that we need to acknowledge these things, and we need to check ourselves to say, is this the right time for us to be asking our question? How will it land with the other person? So sorry, I just wanted to make sure we didn't lose that.
No, it was definitely one that I wanted to come back to, but that was such a brilliant answer. Thank you. We have a few more questions in the chat, and we have probably another 10 minutes together. So if there is a burning thought that you have that you do want to ask Hilary, now is the time to insert it into that space. Okay, so I'm going to jump to a question that's come from Andrew Lorato. And this is one that's kind of very prescient for the outdoor art sector. The venue-based performance world appears to be waking up to the value, accessibility, and the collaborative possibilities of outdoor arts as a way forward. Have you thoughts about how the outdoor arts sector leaders can seize the momentum and make change to the centrality of this sector?
Thinking out loud rather than thoughts that I had earlier. I think partly the issue is to recognize collectively this moment, to recognize that those who are venue-based are listening perhaps a little bit more attentively than previously. So now would be a really good time to mount your campaigns, to link up. So organizations like Circostrada and XTRAX have a window of opportunity with which to push forward. But it comes from really connecting with the 3, 4, 5 issues that you can say will make a difference going forward. And I think, therefore, it's about acknowledging the moment and being strategic with the moment to really say, let's do these 3 things. Let's use the space that we now see to make a difference collectively, something that will work for us as a sector, as well as working on an individual basis. I think the strategic shifts happen when we work strategically. And it's really important when we see those windows to really gather together and push through.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat on uncertainty. Obviously, it's something that's playing on all of our minds. And there's a question asking if you have any more thoughts on how to deal with uncertainty in the long term.
Ooh. So this is where, if you are, please use the chat to share strategies on this, because there's just no one way. So please use the chat, use this conference over the 3 days to share what you know and the tools and the issues that you're facing, as well as to listen in. Uncertainty just means we need to, that issue for me is about getting comfortable with it. So sometimes people think that to lead means to know everything. And there are some who really don't want to make a statement or to step forward until all of the facts are gathered and I've got it all lined up and I've got my 3-point plan, etc., etc. And to be honest, we can't work that way now. And I can't see when we will be able to act with that much certainty again, because we don't know the environment in 6 months' time. We don't know the rules. We don't know all of those things, as I said in my opening piece. So what I find useful to do is to gather as many issues, perspectives as possible. I mean, talk, join every conversation that you can, to listen in and just begin to understand what are the perspectives, what are people saying, how long do they think that this will go on for, who thinks long, who thinks short, etc. Because one of the things that I find helpful, and this is something that I'm using, is if you can listen into those conversations, be part of those conversations, you can then find your own sort of medium and say, actually, I'm not as pessimistic as that person, but I think that person's a little bit too optimistic. And that helps you to judge where you are, where you want to be. So for me, part of the issue is about gathering perspectives and using those various perspectives to find your own. And then you need to work strategically to really differentiate what is innovative, what is steady state, and what is actually a little bit backward or regressive right now. And to really try to lose the things that are regressive, to understand the things that are steady state, but also to really make room for the things that are innovative. And I'm trying to hold at least 3 horizons in sight at all times. So the longer term, so next year, I'm not focusing in on it a big deal because I just don't know. But I have to have it in sight, and I have, 3 or 4 stakes in the ground, as it were, that I think we should be doing this, and I hope we will be able to do that. And if I get a chance, I really would like to do the other. So looking at that so that you are keeping that vision in sight, and then working perhaps much more on the 6 months agenda. So what will we do in that time? Who will we be working with? Because you can see more of that. You still can't determine all of it, but you can see it much more. And then really focusing on the stuff that's immediate. So by maintaining those 3 horizons, it allows you to move forward, because as you go through time, you will always kind of be having the forward agenda in sight, keeping that medium-term focus and the things that you actually can do, and completely dealing with the things that are now. That for me is a way that I'm able to do the uncertainty, but actually still do the planning and still do the leadership, I hope.
Brilliant. It reminds me of something that I think you actually said to me, that strategy is a process and not a fixed destination.
Oh, yeah, that was a sensible thought.
So we are fast approaching midday, and I think that means that we are coming to the end of the session. Hilary, it has been fantastic talking and listening to you. I always feel a little bit wiser after being in your presence. So I'm going to invite Anais and Stefan back into the space. Hello.
Hello again.
Hey again. Thank you so much, Hilary and Vicki, for these inspiring thoughts, this clarity of thinking, and your radical generosity. I only wish we could have lunch right now and hang out and keep talking, but I'm sure we will do that in the future. Even though it's uncertain, I'm sure we will manage to do something together again. And thank you so much, Vicki, for moderating this session. I know it's not easy to moderate between talking with the speaker, checking the questions, making sure that it's all flowing. You did a magnificent job. Thank you so much. Anais, you have also something to share with us, and yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to thank everyone for attending this webinar. I'd like to remind you that you can use the same link to attend the other keynote sessions that we have tomorrow and on Friday. So they will start at 11 a.m. UK time, and that is 12 o'clock Central European time, and will be slightly shorter, 45 minutes. To finalize the CS Lab, we will have a wrap-up session on Friday afternoon at 3 p.m. UK time and 4 p.m. Central European time, for which you can use the same link. I'd also like to remind you that we have a few questions coming up as you exit the webinar. So we kindly ask that you spend just a few minutes to give us some feedback. This is always important, of course, to make the case for these sort of activities, and also to help us ensure that we're providing meaningful content. So once again, thank you to our listeners and to your wonderful speakers, and we hope that you will be joining us for the coming sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Vicki. You did a brilliant job. Lovely working with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.